Oscar had never believed in love at first sight until he met Genevieve. It was a chilly evening in late October, and he had just arrived at a mutual friend's housewarming party. The room was filled with laughter and conversation, but all of it faded away the moment he saw her. Genevieve stood by the window, looking out at the city lights, her hair catching the soft glow of the setting sun. Oscar couldn't explain it, but something inside him shifted. It was as if the world had aligned, and she was the only thing that mattered. From that moment, their connection only deepened. Over the next 4 years, their relationship became the most important part of his life. They shared everything: dreams, fears, triumphs, and failures. Every moment with her felt like a blessing, and he couldn't imagine his life without her. Their love grew quietly and confidently, like a strong tree that had weathered many storms. Now, 4 years later, Oscar knew it was time to take the next step. He had always imagined their future together, but now it was no longer just a dream. He was ready to make her his forever, and he couldn't wait to see her reaction when he finally proposed. Oscar was not one to rush into decisions, especially one as important as proposing to Genevieve. He wanted everything to be perfect, every detail planned out to ensure that the proposal would be a moment neither of them would ever forget. Over the weeks leading up to the big day, he found himself obsessing over every little thing. He visited jewelry stores, carefully examining rings until he found the perfect one, a delicate band with a brilliant diamond that sparkled just like Genevieve's eyes. Once the ring was chosen, Oscar's attention turned to the proposal itself. He spent hours rehearsing what he would say, practicing in front of the mirror until the words felt right. He wanted to express everything he felt for her, how much she meant to him, how he couldn't imagine his life without her, and how he wanted to spend the rest of his days making her happy. Then, there was the location. Genevieve had once mentioned that she dreamed of a public proposal, something grand and romantic. Oscar knew he had to make that dream come true. After much deliberation, he decided on a beautiful mall, where he could surprise her in front of a crowd, making the moment as special as possible. The morning of the proposal, Oscar woke up with butterflies in his stomach. This was it, the day he had been planning for weeks. He had barely slept the night before, too excited to close his eyes. As he got dressed, he couldn't stop smiling, imagining the look on Genevieve's face when she saw what he had planned. He checked the ring box one last time, making sure it was safely tucked in his pocket before heading to the mall. When he arrived at the mall, the staff he had coordinated with were already setting up. He supervised as they arranged everything perfectly: the rose petals scattered on the floor in a heart shape, the large sign that read, "Will you marry me?" in elegant calligraphy, and the string quartet that was quietly tuning their instruments. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. The mall was starting to fill with people going about their day, completely unaware of the grand gesture about to unfold. Oscar's heart pounded with anticipation as he looked around, waiting for Genevieve to arrive. Everything was ready. Now, all he needed was the love of his life to walk through those doors. Mark, Tunde, and Femi had been Oscar's closest friends since their university days, and they were more than happy to help with the proposal. They had witnessed Oscar and Genevieve's relationship blossom over the years and knew how much this moment meant to him. As they drove to Genevieve's house, the atmosphere in the car was light and filled with banter. They joked about how nervous Oscar must be, but they all knew deep down that this proposal would go off without a hitch. The drive was smooth at first, the excitement in the air contagious. But as they turned onto a quieter road, the mood quickly shifted. Out of nowhere, a black SUV appeared and blocked their path. The men inside didn't have to guess what was happening, instinct told them this was trouble. Before they could react, masked men armed with guns surrounded their car, their faces hidden behind balaclavas, their intentions unclear but undoubtedly dangerous. The friends exchanged nervous glances, their hearts pounding in their chests. This wasn't part of the plan. Mark, who was driving, tried to stay calm as one of the men knocked on his window with the barrel of a gun. "Stay cool, do exactly as we say, and no one gets hurt," the man growled. They had no choice but to comply. The leader of the bandits spoke with a calm yet menacing tone as he ordered Oscar's friends to continue with their plan as if nothing had happened. "You're going to pick up the girl, like you were supposed to," he said, "but you're going to do it with us following close behind. If you try to alert anyone or make a wrong move, you'll regret it." The friends were terrified, but they knew they had no choice. They couldn't risk the safety of Genevieve or themselves. They reluctantly nodded, their minds racing as they wondered how they could get out of this situation. Mark started the car again, his hands shaking on the steering wheel as he followed the bandits' instructions. As they drove, the black SUV followed closely behind them, a constant reminder of the danger they were in. They tried to keep their composure, knowing that if Genevieve sensed something was wrong, the situation could escalate quickly. None of them had ever been in a situation like this before, and the fear was suffocating. All they could do was pray that they would find a way to escape this nightmare. When they arrived at Genevieve's home, she was already waiting outside, looking radiant in a simple yet elegant dress. She greeted them with a warm smile, completely unaware of the danger lurking nearby. "What's this about?" she asked playfully as she approached the car. "Did Oscar put you up to something special?" The friends exchanged uneasy glances but managed to force smiles. Mark, trying to keep his voice steady, replied, "Yeah, Oscar wanted us to pick you up in style. He's got a surprise for you." Genevieve's eyes lit up with excitement as she climbed into the backseat, completely oblivious to the armed men following them. She had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. After all, these were Oscar's closest friends, and she trusted them. As they drove off, she chatted excitedly about what Oscar might have planned, completely unaware of the tension in the car. The bandits followed closely behind, watching their every move. Mark, Tunde, and Femi tried to keep up the act, but inside, they were terrified. They couldn't let Genevieve find out what was really happening, but they also couldn't figure out a way to escape this nightmare. They were trapped, with no clear way out. As they drove further from Genevieve's home, the atmosphere in the car grew increasingly tense. Genevieve, always perceptive, began to notice the unease in her friends' faces. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her smile fading as she looked at them. Her voice was laced with concern, but before anyone could answer, everything changed in an instant. One of the bandits sitting in the backseat suddenly leaned forward, pointing a gun at Genevieve. "Keep driving," he ordered, his voice cold and void of any emotion. Genevieve froze, her heart pounding in her chest as the reality of the situation sank in. This wasn't a surprise proposal, this was a nightmare. The car fell into a tense silence, the only sound being the hum of the engine as Mark continued driving. Genevieve's mind raced with fear and confusion. What did these men want? Why were they doing this? She glanced at her friends, but they avoided her gaze, too scared to offer any comfort. The bandit kept his gun trained on her, his eyes dark and unreadable. Genevieve's heart raced as she tried to stay calm, but the terror was overwhelming. She wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but she knew that any wrong move could be fatal. All she could do was sit in the backseat, praying that somehow, they would all make it out of this alive. The car suddenly veered off the main road, leaving behind the familiar streets of the city and heading into a more desolate area. Genevieve's heart raced with fear as she realized they were being taken somewhere remote, far away from any help. The once lively chatter in the car had been replaced by a deafening silence, broken only by the occasional muttered orders from the bandits. After what felt like an eternity, the car pulled up in front of an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The building loomed ahead, its broken windows and crumbling walls adding to the sense of dread that filled Genevieve's heart. This wasn't some grand romantic gesture, this was a kidnapping. The bandits ordered everyone out of the car. Genevieve's legs felt like jelly as she stepped onto the gravelly ground, her mind spinning with terror. Mark, Tunde, and Femi followed closely behind her, their faces pale with fear. The bandits herded them towards the warehouse, their guns a constant reminder of the danger they were in. Time ticked by agonizingly slow as Oscar continued pacing at the mall, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. The string quartet had played through their set twice, and the crowd that had gathered for the proposal was beginning to disperse. Oscar felt his anxiety growing with every second that passed. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. His hands were shaking as he tried calling Genevieve again, but like the others, her phone went straight to voicemail. Panic began to rise in his chest as he ran through every possible scenario in his mind. Had they gotten lost? Maybe there was an accident. Or, God forbid, something even worse. He quickly dismissed the thought, not wanting to imagine the worst-case scenario. But the longer he waited, the more that sinking feeling grew. He couldn't stand the helplessness of waiting any longer. He knew he had to do something, anything, to find out where they were. Oscar's eyes darted around the mall as he looked for someone to help. He spotted one of the mall security guards and rushed over to him, explaining the situation as quickly as he could. The guard listened patiently, but there was little he could do other than advise Oscar to call the police if he truly believed something was wrong. Oscar hesitated. Calling the police felt like admitting that this wasn't just a delay, it was something far more serious. But deep down, he knew he couldn't ignore the gnawing fear any longer. With trembling hands, Oscar dialed the emergency number, his voice shaky as he explained that his fiancée and friends were missing. The operator assured him that they would send someone to check it out, but Oscar knew that even with the police involved, the situation was spiraling out of his control. Meanwhile, inside the abandoned warehouse, Genevieve and Oscar's friends were huddled together in fear. The masked men had forced them out of the car and into the cold, dark building. The air was thick with tension, and Genevieve's mind was racing as she tried to make sense of what was happening. She had been excited just moments ago, thinking this was all part of Oscar's grand surprise. But now, reality was sinking in, and it was terrifying. The bandits had been silent since they arrived at the warehouse, their faces hidden behind black masks, their guns pointed at the group. Genevieve's heart pounded in her chest as she glanced at Mark, Tunde, and Femi, who were all equally scared. She could see the fear in their eyes, and it only made her more anxious. "What do you want from us?" Genevieve finally dared to ask, her voice shaky but determined. One of the bandits stepped forward, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "You'll know soon enough," he replied cryptically, his tone sending a shiver down her spine. The uncertainty of their fate was overwhelming. Were they being held for ransom? Were these men after something more? Every second in that warehouse felt like an eternity. Genevieve tried to stay calm, but the fear was suffocating. She had no idea what these men wanted, and the unknown was more terrifying than anything else.